So in this episode, we're going to be talking all about IoT, or in case you don't know, the Internet of Things. And we've got a great guest joining us today, Peter Gallagher, who's going to keep us all up to date on the goings-on. Listen in to find out more. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you folks for joining. We've got another of these tales from the real world episodes here, and we're going to be talking all about Internet of Things, IoT. It might be an area that you've always been interested in. You've heard about these devices that you can go and get, Raspberry Pis, amongst other things. But maybe you haven't quite started your journey yet. You needed something to coax you along. Or maybe you're further along the journey and you still want to pick up something new because it's an ever-evolving space. Well, I'm very pleased today to be joined by Peter Gallagher, who I'm sure if you've been looking at IoT in the past, you'll probably recognize as a name in the space, but we'll get him on the show in just a moment and introducing himself. But before you do, if you like the episode, please go ahead, hit like, hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell because you know the deal. It helps us understand whether you like the content, what you don't like as much, and get more of the stuff that you like. So with that, let's go ahead and bring Peter onto the show here. Hey, Peter, how are we doing, sir?
Hey, not bad. Geez, Peter as well.
I know.
My mum and my sister, I think,
don't
mainly.
know why I full named you at all. As I did it, I was like, cringing already. But there we go.
Yeah,
Gallagher.
I was expecting middle names and everything coming out there. And Sir at the start, maybe.
Sir Peter Gallagher of the Realm has joined us to discuss the devices of the cloud. I feel like we're going into a mysterious world at that point.
I like it. It's good.
So, Pete, would you care to introduce yourself? Because I've done such a bad job.
No, not at all. No, it's funny. People do that, actually, use like the full Peter, and it's just it's sort of one of those things you don't hear very often when you're me. So, no, it's cool. So, yeah, I'm a software consultant, mainly in the IoT space, but like any software consultant, I'll sort of do whatever's thrown my way. So that tends to make my days interesting because, like today, I'm doing Node and Vue all day, but tomorrow it could well be assembler, and then the day after that it could be VB, and then after that it could be C#. So it does keep me busy. But I prefer the IoT space, which is obviously why we're speaking today, and then the topic of today's conversation. But that, and I'm a Pluralsight Author and Microsoft MVP and an MCT and Meetup coordinator and public speaker and things like that as well. So I like to keep myself really busy.
I was going to say, where is your free time in all of that?
I just don't sleep. It's fine,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. No, awesome. And I think before we were going live, we were talking about a rough kind of structure and how we'll kind of flow things. And I think one of the things that would be good for us to talk about, like we've had with a few of the others, is the community side of things, because, it's something you and I, that's how we met, through the community. There's, of course, a few different events. In fact, I'll be speaking with one of your events very soon.
You will.
And I think there's a great community that we're a part of. So how did you kind of get involved in the community? And I guess what some people may be interested in as well is kind of the Meetup side, how you got started there, as well as things like the Pluralsight of things as well. Pluralsight side of things, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going to meetups for ages, actually. .NET Knots, which I now run, as it happens. I saw, must have been something on Twitter maybe back in the early days where they had a reasonably famous speaker. I can't remember it. Sean Wildermuth, that's what it was. And I saw that they'd had him, and I thought, this sounds like a great idea because, I've been sort of, the company I was working for, I was the only dev there, and this is before sort of the internet proper, really. So you're talking about sort of 2001, 2002, maybe, that I'd started looking at like proper .NET stuff, and then I'd been doing that just on my own in this little vacuum. And then Twitter came along, and I was able to see what other people were doing, and spotted just in Nottingham, which is like 15 miles away from here, that there was this meetup group of other people doing .NET. It was a fantastic idea. So I went along to that. And then I probably only missed a couple for years and years and years. And there's other stuff that happened in between, but the two organisers One of them, he migrated across and he was doing everything in the iPhone landscape. So he was doing mostly sort of Java and that sort of stuff and Swift and stuff like that. So he wasn't interested in .NET anymore. And the other organizer, he started his own company up and he just had no time. So they asked me if I was interested in taking it over. So that's one of the meetup groups that I organize.
Absolutely awesome. And I think it's a great thing to get involved with. I got started in Azure Thames Valley earlier this year, and I'm loving being part of the community and being able to give back a bit. And I think that's one of the things, isn't it, is you meet such a wealth of people, you just learn so much as well, I find.
Yeah. Well, the bonus is when you run meetup groups, and I run 4 essentially, well, not fully run, but so there's .NET Knots, which I mentioned, and Knots Dev Workshop. I was invited to help co-organize that. That was like the first thing I was properly organized in with Gosha Borcheska and Misha Bell. And then Knots IoT, which is my own baby. So I was running those, and then another group, Lati, which is sort of a bit more of a formal organization, a networking group. And I know that you're speaking very soon at that same group. So this is sort of a high-tech group for business people, scientists, and stuff like that. So I know you're going to give an intro to Azure, which is a fantastic sort of playing field for them to start off from. They're not going to be experts in any cloud technology, I don't think, other than OneDrive. Sure. So it'll be good for them to see what it's capable of. So awesome. Yeah, and the great thing is you get to choose the speakers when you're running these things. So you find something that's really interesting to you, and of course you do know your audience, so you know what's going to work well. But for the most part, we get to choose the cool speakers and the cool topics. Usually a speaker will give you 5 or 6 topics, and you can go, "Yep, like that one there."
Exactly.
Have that.
I think it is the way, isn't it? As a speaker, you almost have your kit bag of here are the things. Here's a smorgasbord. Pick what you like. Go.
Yeah. No, exactly that. It does work that way, and I've certainly got that. I've got all my talks listed on my website, and I could spend more time and make it a little bit more user friendly, but it works. Yeah, exactly. It's not bad.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then, as if you weren't doing enough and filling all the time, you are a Pluralsight author as well. And I think that's something that I'm sure will pique a few people's interest, because I've used Pluralsight no end of times. I'm sure at some point I've probably watched one of your courses and not even realized. And, I'm sure I've done that. So how did you get into that space? Where did that all start?
Yeah, I mean, it started from community work, really. I mean, I've been making blogs and knocking up proof of concept stuff and doing the odd YouTube video, and then loads of talking in at events, both in person when you were allowed to do that, and now obviously virtual. And obviously, I got partway through doing all of that chain of events, and I really enjoyed doing it. And I said to myself, I'd like to do this for a job. It'd be awesome to. I mean, when you're doing a real job, you obviously have to produce something that's perfect, or as damn it at the end, to a perfect product. And then you've got that whole cycle of the bug fixing and feature improvements, and exactly. And I don't enjoy that part. I'm good at it. I still do it. Obviously, I've got pride in what I make, but that's not what I enjoy. What I enjoy is making something work and showing other people how that works. So I said that out loud to myself almost at that point in time, and obviously I already knew about things like Pluralsight. So one of my good friends from Derby, Stephen Haunts, he's a Pluralsight author, a really successful one. He's been doing it for years, and just before the pandemic, he'd arranged for me to be his +1 at Pluralsight Live down in London, which would have been just after the MVP summit. And so I was supposed to go down there and meet some of the author success managers, as they were called, to be able to see if I could get onboarded, and then the pandemic hit and all of that. But eventually the stars aligned, and I was able to send it. I mean, at that point, I'd already given my audition piece and got accepted as an author. But the IoT content they wanted me to do had been put on hold, sadly, and then eventually, like, I don't know, it would have been 10 months later or something, that content was finally greenlit, and myself and a few other authors were allowed to create that content, and that the rest is history, I guess.
Awesome. Because I think it was quite recently released some content again as well, wasn't it? Was it no
Yeah, I think it was
course?
about a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Awesome.
and I've got to go back through the existing content because obviously everything changes. This is an exam learning path, it's called,
Yes, gotcha.
certification learning path. So this is for the AZ220, and if you're in America, AZ220 exam, which is the IoT developer certification exam, all on the Microsoft Azure components for IoT and some other bits that aren't.
Awesome.
So a few of us are creating the content for that. Now, I'm in a reasonable position for that because I helped also create the exam. So I helped create a lot of the questions for that. So my content is pretty specific.
Puts you in a good place to, give some guidance on the syllabus, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had some nice messages from the Microsoft IoT team themselves on my content. And I know they've been sharing it internally at Microsoft as well. So
Awesome.
it gives you a little bit of a proud moment. I mean, it's not paying the mortgage, if you will, but it certainly earns a little bit of money. But, it's a good thing to do. It's fun.
It's balance, isn't it? I think you've obviously got to have the things that pay the mortgage and keep the lights on, etc. But you've also got to have that thing where you can have that almost that creativity and that passion and have that kind of output for that. So no, that's awesome. Excellent. So we've talked about IoT. Where did that passion area for IoT start?
I mean, I've been doing IoT since around 1999, which I think is when the phrase was coined, around that sort of time. So I did college and then university. I didn't do A levels and then university. I preferred the more practical aspects of electronics and electrical engineering. So that's the route that I took through college and university. And there wasn't really an IoT when I was doing that. So I mean, it must have been 1993 when I went to college, and then 99 when I finished. And so I started my first job, which was like a mile and a half down the road. I was dead lucky, making cash handling equipment, so change machines and kiosks.
Nice.
And one of the first projects I got flung into was an existing project where we'd fitted Royal Mail stamp vending machines with modems. And you could dial into them using an actual phone line and pull out all of the audit trails and the event history and stuff like that. Now, I'd not written that, but I supported it. Yeah. So that was I mean, I count that as IoT. I mean, it's machine to machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not really internet. But that was my first sort of interaction with technology like that, other than BBSs on the old Amigas and stuff like that, where you could dial in and stuff. But even that I wouldn't count. But it's similar. And so then I was with them for about 11 years, and things moved on, and there was real world internet and stuff like that. And so that's where my love of that came from. I loved that. Being able to interact with things at a distance is pretty cool. Awesome. Without actually having to be there. So awesome. Yeah.
I was chatting with John Lunn fairly recently. He was a guest on the show, and he was talking about his kind of passion for IoT as well. And I think it's just such an exciting space, isn't it? Because I think the thing I said to him is, great, we've had these devices all along, nothing's really changed from an Internet of Things perspective. The devices have been there all the time. We've had the factory warehouses with all of these equipment and whatnot, etc. But now the real exciting thing that's kind of changing with the industry is the fact that actually all those devices, as you rightly say, we've got the internet bit now, and that's actually in a pretty good space. We've got this kind of cloud thing that is getting pretty stable and pretty established now. Actually, all of that machinery, all of those devices, which is just doing stuff, what could we actually do with that? And it's all these kind of interesting scenarios. People are now thinking, what if we did hook that up to the cloud and then did this and actually captured that data? And it starts leading to these new scenarios we hadn't really thought about, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the telemetry that you can grab off of there. I mean, obviously, I'm a device geek. I like the devices just as much as anything. But then the fact that I had access to the devices, and then you could hook it up to these cloud services, as you said, it takes it to that whole extra level. Even just being able to dial into a website and turn on somebody else's light. And that was one of the first cool demos, or at least I thought it was cool back then. And I think that was like a little microchip board. So one of the early embedded internet boards, and somebody had just made a website in this little microchip board and hooked up a mains relay to it. And you could click a button and it was like clink. And it was like, oh, how cool is that? I like that. and somebody else had made like one of those grabbing machines, the claw from Toy Story, one of those, and you could tell it where to go over the internet, this real machine, awesome. And go and pick something up. That stuff like that. It was a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy. Is just kind of, it's not directly business orientated. It's just almost, can you do it?
Yeah,
and rather than why should I do it? Yeah, exactly. And I think but that's really important, because I've done so much of that stuff sort of offline, if you will, without a client. And then in the not too big distance in time between those, I've ended up with a client that needed something like that. And you can always bend it that way, and you're going to learn a lot by doing that. Certainly if it's something for you, you're going to learn a lot as well, because you're going to want to make it work, and what you want to get out of that, so long as you don't give up. And it's very easy to give up when it's not working. There's only so much screaming at the TV at the screen you can do.
I think it's one of those things where you have to go away from a problem sometimes, don't you, and just come back to it fresh. I find that so many times with me.
Hit the sleep reset button.
Absolutely. So good. So let's jump a bit into IoT then. So let's assume that I'm someone who has not really done much in the IoT space before. I've done bits, but not much. But let's assume maybe I'm at the beginning of my journey for some of the listeners here. What are maybe some of the tools, some of the things that maybe I should start looking at to kind of help me along that journey, I guess?
Yeah, I get that question quite a lot, actually. And it kind of depends on what your end goal is to a degree. And your personality as well. I think most of the IoT people I've met tend to have quite a fun personality. They like to tinker with things just out of nature. They just want to figure out how stuff works and hook things together. I've not met many that are sort of really, I've just got a specific business need. I'm not interested in learning anything else. I just want to make it work. Yep. I've met some. Absolutely, and that's fine. But I am absolutely one of the people that likes to buy a device and hook it up to the internet, or find a new service on the internet and hook a device up to that. And there's absolutely, I mean, the Raspberry Pi is a great way to start, and that's exactly
was really great timing, wasn't it? That
it was, yeah. So that's your Raspberry Pi cluster there. So it looks like you've got 4 devices there?
2 indeed.
5? No, 4. There's 4. Yeah. So I love the Raspberry Pi, and in fact, the company, that change machine company that I was working for, I was made redundant from there, and then I started up on my own at that point, doing all sorts of stuff, website work and Windows Forms applications and anything that I could take, because it was a brand new business. And I didn't do a great deal of IoT for a while until the Raspberry Pi came out, funnily enough. I did bits and bobs, but nothing serious. The Raspberry Pi came out, and that really rekindled because it was easy, and it was a proper programming language. You didn't have to do C or C++. You could do it in whatever you wanted, and there's lovely GPIO ports hanging off there. And of course, you could like make a website on there quite easily, or turn it into a Kodi box.
Yep.
Or what's that? Is that a Kubernetes cluster you've made?
It is a Kubernetes cluster. You're spot on.
Perfect. Yeah. And in fact, that's not too far off how Raspberry Pi hosts their website. They've got I forget, I think it's Magic Unicorns or something like that. It's called the company that they use for that. I've got a Raspberry Pi cluster that they serve that website from. It's quite cool.
That's amazing. So, I love that.
So I like that. So, but obviously then other things come to mind. I mean, everybody knows about the Raspberry Pi, but there's also things like Arduino.
Yep.
And to go right back to your original question about, what would I do? What would I tell somebody who wants to start out? One of my favorite devices is the microbit. And this is aimed at schools, and that sort of category, but actually it's a pretty powerful device. You can do quite a lot with it. And Microsoft have made an environment here which is very much like Scratch. So again, if you've done anything with the Raspberry Pi, then you'll have probably used Scratch, or if you've had any code club experience or anything like that. And that's a block-based programming language. So you click together these Lego blocks of instructions, if you will, into your own program, and you can get it to do something. So Microsoft have made Make Code, which is what you're looking at here, and you can create a new project. So I'll just call that Chris One Look. And what it does there is it spins you up a simulated microbit on the left hand side, and then a bunch of programming language areas on the right. So you've got an on start function, if you will, and then a forever function. So you can drag things like show an icon into that on start, and then you'll notice on the left that icon appears, which is pretty cool. And then you can do things like drag buttons on there as well, and then drag an icon and get the icon to do something different, maybe that one. Then you can actually press these buttons, which is cool. So when that finishes refreshing, you can press that. But you could do other cool things as well. So down here on pins, I can actually scroll down a bit and I can drag this servo pin on there and watch what happens underneath the microbit. An actual servo, an actual simulated servo will appear on there, and you can press the button and then it will move that servo.
Awesome.
So obviously I could do that again for a B button if you wanted to and get it to go either way. But what you've got there is the basics of a robot arm, but without having to wire it all together and get that to work. But what's really cool, and as I don't know why they've chosen those wire colors for these, but if you can just about see, if I sort of zoom in, it won't let me zoom in very easily. Down here there's yellow, red and brown, and they're the actual colors of most servo wires that you'll get if you just buy a cheap 9G servo off of Amazon. So it's actually telling you exactly how you wire this up.
Yeah.
And you're not stuck in here either, which is great. Once you've finished your code, you can press the download button, and if you've got a microbit plugged in, and you can download it directly to the microbit.
Nice.
And then you just hook it up like this, and for the most part it'll just work. Often there's a little battery pack that you've got to plug in because the USB power sometimes isn't enough for some of these servos. Mostly it'll work, but better off with a little battery pack and plug it in. That's awesome. This is a great place for someone to start IoT. Obviously there's not much I in that IoT though, so it's more OT. Sure. There are things you can do, but for the most part you're trapped in the of things section there. And I think if people want to go from this up, then it's the difficult transition, and there's not an easy jump you can make. But we've mentioned the Raspberry Pi, and that's where I'd recommend people go after that. So if you want to do the cloud side of things, there's a few things. There's also M5 Stack, which if you follow people like Olivier Bloch, maybe you'll have seen he's done a few video tutorials on how you can use the M5 Stack. So that's a little bit like Make Code, so you get this environment like that, but you can drag on a block that will let you interact with things like the Azure IoT Hub, which is cool. But again, I think you'll find yourself quite stuck. It's great, that M5 project's great, and you can plug in like seed sensors and stuff like that into the side of it, but you'll be stuck in that ecosystem at that point, and you probably haven't learned a great deal of programming by doing this. You've learned some concepts, absolutely, variables and functions and loops and all of the important stuff. But I think if you want to go to the cloud, I think ideally you'd probably go for a Raspberry Pi next. Yeah. And you can then program that in pretty much whatever language you like. And you can do C# if you like now. .NET 5 on a Raspberry Pi is easy. And I've got a blog post that allows you to have a single line install for that even. So you just run a single line of a bash script and it'll install the whole lot for you. But this example here that I'm showing is an online simulator, and it's all in Node. Now, theoretically, you don't need to worry about what any of this code is at all. All you need to do is grab a connection string, which is what I've got across here. And there's a whole tutorial that takes you through exactly what you need to do do that. Replace it with your actual string there, and off you go, and it starts communicating with Azure. Now, I could demo it, but we'd be there for a while doing that. Sure. But what it does is it sends messages up to Azure, and then you can use another little application called the Azure IoT Explorer here that I've got down here to read the messages that are hitting the IoT hub. So, I mean, what's great about this is you don't need the hardware. So you can do all of this work just in the browser without needing to actually buy the Raspberry Pi and program Raspbian or Raspberry Pi OS as it is now onto that. And then maybe you want this temperature and humidity sensor, and you'll have to wire that up. And often these come without headers. Yeah. So you've got to solder them on and buy breadboard. And even I've run workshops, and some people struggle just with the concept of that these pins are vertically connected together but not horizontally connected together, and not past this part in the middle. So stuff that I take for granted in my head because I just know it, that you've got to spend time and understand. So it's quite easy for you to get this wrong while you're doing it. So a simulator like this is fantastic because you just concentrate on maybe the part you're interested in. Maybe you're just interested in making Azure work, and then taking the telemetry, the simulated telemetry, and then sending it out to blob storage or anything you wanted at that point to be able to hook it into other Azure services. So that's great.
Awesome.
But there's one more thing. There is one more thing, and it's back in the OT scale of things. But this Tinkercad here, which isn't Microsoft, this is Autodesk based, but that allows you to drag an Arduino on there. And what's great about it, though, is that when you do drag the Arduino on there and program it, you're not programming in C like you would be normally for an Arduino. You can program it in a very similar looking block programming language, just like you saw in MakeCode. So you saw that pop up there a second ago. So that is how you'd go about programming the simulated device, but you can download it and it will download the C equivalent of that code, which is cool.
Wow.
But you can also switch this to text and you'll get the C equivalent, and you can then put breakpoints in the code here and simulate your code in the browser. So these things are great because, I mean, if you've ever tried to do any amount of Arduino programming, any amount of debugging is hard.
Yeah, no,
it's just difficult. So you're into JTAG and stuff like that, and there are fantastic tools out there, but it's actually quite complicated to get working. So if you're trying to start out with Arduino, then just doing it in blocks is a great place to try and start, and then you can switch across to text. And that's quite similar to MakeCode as well, actually. You've got a choice of switching to JavaScript if you like, or you can switch to Python now, which is quite new.
Nice.
So you can do it in Python instead. So this is a great tool for people that want to play with the tech, but perhaps haven't got all of the programming knowledge behind it. And it's great for sort of young adults and students and stuff like that that are just starting out. And I find that you can talk about programming till the cows come home, but when you start talking about physical computing, people become a lot more interested, and children especially.
Real, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you tell them you can make a robot arm or a remote control car or something like that, and they love that as a premise because they can understand it. They can physically touch it then afterwards, and that's why I like this sort of stuff.
No, and the passion clearly comes across as well. That's awesome. And I think there's a great few set of tools there. I think another one that we were talking about just before going live was the mobile app that has recently come out from the Azure team as well. So I think one of the things that commonly is a bit of a blocker for people is the fact they don't have that device. And we've seen some examples there of various simulators. But if you want to kind of connect it up to the Azure side of things, you might need to kind of wire some of that up, as we just saw. But actually, what if you had a device, like, let's say a phone that everyone seems to have, that you could just go and wire up and simulate being an IoT device. Again, I think that's just another awesome way of making that really accessible and just lowering that barrier of entry for people. It's really cool.
Yeah, see, I've not even installed it yet. I've not had time. I've been really busy recently with one thing and another, so I've not had a chance to have a play with that. So I'm going to install that now. While we're on
there we go.
That's how easy that is.
It's
probably going to ask me to use. Yeah, exactly. I probably have to use two-factor authentication now to get that to go on. Oh no, it's fine. It's going to do it. Awesome. Definitely. Yeah, I need to have a play with that and see how that works. But yeah, it looks really cool. So it's using the sensors built into your phone, and it's sending that as telemetry up to either, I guess, IoT Hub or IoT Central. So this is an IoT Central demo application that they've got there, and then you can see the location data, battery level, altitude, and then all the accelerometer stuff and pressure. Yeah, I mean, obviously your phone is a massively powerful device, and it is probably the most prolific. That one. So it's easy for you to say prolific IoT device out there. So that and smartwatches, those two things there, I'd guess, will be the two most common that everybody will have. So to leverage that, it's a great idea. I like it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I guess we've been focusing for a bit there on the of things side of the IoT. But I guess the thing about Azure, of course, is, the devices don't really live in Azure at all. That's not how the IoT piece works. It's the fact that they'll connect back and then, sure, like I mentioned earlier, we've had that of things stuff for a while now, but really the beauty of cloud, the beauty of the evolution of what we're seeing is the fact that actually we don't just have one device, we don't just have hundreds of devices, we probably have thousands of devices. Think about for anyone listening in, think about things like factories where you've got different types of machinery on the plant, for example. Think about cars, for example, the amount of sensors in your cars, like Teslas, for example. They're, of course, a very obvious thought process of a very modern kind of car for that side of things. You can think of so many different scenarios, even something as simple as a door. Like, think if you are, I don't know, a lift company, let's say, and as a lift, you'll have kind of opening doors, closing, you'll have the mechanisms on your lift. There's so much data and insight there that you can take out because no one wants to be trapped in a lift. No one wants to have that kind of mindset of, oh, I've kind of stuck in here until the repairman comes out and hopefully they can fix whatever's wrong and then we get out and it's all good. Wouldn't it be better that actually you can use all of that information coming from those devices to predict actually something's looking a bit unhealthy with this device? Maybe we need to be a bit proactive around what's going on there and just send a mechanic out to take a look at that before something goes wrong. I think that's the magic that we see with a lot of IoT is actually taking all of that input and that telemetry you mentioned earlier, reasoning over it, doing something with it, probably putting some machine learning around it as well, and then making some insights come out of that then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where the money is. Leveraging that telemetry to be able to do predictive maintenance and things, AI, machine learning, stuff like that. Absolutely is what's going to drive things forward. Actually, we spoke about mobile phones earlier as well. They've driven into the IoT world the democratization of cheap sensors and cameras and things like that. So the CCD cameras that you've got in your mobile phone and the wireless devices, they've been made cheap and small by the fact that people need them in their mobile phones. So that's been great for IoT. So now you can fit cameras to everything and use that for machine learning, some cognitive services. And what's more impressive is that you can do a lot of this processing at the edge even, so on devices like a Raspberry Pi.
Yes.
So instead of having to pay for the cloud services and also the inherent latency that you get between a device and the cloud, you can do a lot of that down at the device. And obviously, Microsoft, they've got a reference architecture called the Percept, which I've got in front of me here as it happens. And that's got a vision system on a module SOM and an audio SOM, if you will. So, and then a carrier board. So the carrier board or processor board, that's the equivalent of a Raspberry Pi, if you will, but a bit more ruggedized and powerful. And then the vision module sits there and it's got a camera attached to it. And then the audio side is pretty much like an Alexa, if you will, allowing you to give it voice commands.
Nice.
And I've been writing a series of blog posts actually for the tech community, the IoT blog, around the system, the audio system on that, and how you'd get that all hooked up to Azure. And I've got that now, so I can turn a lamp on and off that's on my desk behind me. You can't see because bit is in the way, but
awesome.
so I've been having quite a lot of fun with that. But that sort of stuff. Even taking train lines as an example, like they used to have to pay like maybe thousands of pounds for boxes that install along train lines to be able to monitor them, and now that technology is so cheap and you can go straight to the cloud without having to worry about it these days. That price point is way down, and it becomes the point of I can't afford to instrument my technology like that, to why can't I? And why shouldn't I? So just do it anyway. And obviously there's security concerns with a lot of that. And I know people don't like things like smart meters in the house for that same reason, because there's inherent security concerns with how the data's used, which is a whole flip side of a conversation when you start talking about data. But yeah, we're at the edge, which is a pun, I know, but of sort of the next step in instrumenting our whole world with things like digital twins coming in as well. It's awesome to be a part of that and see it growing and the usage of all of these tools being able to make our lives easier and stuff. So yeah.
No, we'll come back to digital twins in a minute. I think you're spying on my brain or something. I think you've got chips embedded in my brain because
yes,
that's where I was going. But before we do, coming back to the Edge comment, because we made a couple of Edge puns and comments in there. Um, that is honestly one of the areas that fascinates me, and I really love about the strategy that Microsoft is kind of rolling out. Because yes, you've got things like IoT Hub, excuse me, IoT Hub or IoT Central, where you can kind of ingest the data and do some stuff with the data there. But then you've got things like IoT Edge, where actually you've got this consistent runtime, this consistent platform, no matter really within reason, no matter what the device you're running, you can go ahead and almost orchestrate your devices a bit like you would a Kubernetes cluster, go and deploy, that Stream Analytics job or that Azure function or whatever it may be, right on the edge, as you say, close to where the information needs to be done, processed, whatever, and get some very quick real-time processing done. But then you still benefit from all of that cloud stuff because that cloud magic is originally created in Azure, public cloud, but then brought to your devices through IoT Edge. Great. But then you don't need to just kind of leave it there. You can then bring it back for, for analysis or for your archiving or whatever it may be. So I think that picture of how IoT Edge comes into play, because it is all based upon Docker and container technologies there that really enable that, I just think is really fascinating. I think we always think about containers with Kubernetes and running workloads and whatnot, but actually the fact I can run containers on something like this and actually start having IoT Edge installed on those devices, and assuming I had one in different rooms of my house, being able to start triggering things, doing things locally, and having Azure functions, Stream Analytics running on these things is just really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good reasons to use edge processing. I mean, if you imagine one of the common scenarios is if you've got a factory with a milling machine, and all you're doing is making sure that the milling machine doesn't destroy itself because it goes wrong. For 99% of its life, that telemetry is pretty boring.
Yep.
So if you were sending and the point being is that for it not to destroy itself, you need to be pretty quick. So you need to be taking quite a lot of telemetry out of it to be able to discover that there's something gone wrong, and you can stop it immediately. Now, if you're having to send all of that information to the cloud, not only is that going to cost you a fortune, and you're analyzing pretty much static information for the most part of its life, so it's just a waste of money, but there's also a latency in that, and it's probably going to be more than you need to be able to stop your machine quickly enough. So to be able to do that analysis down at the edge, and then perhaps just send point in time data up every now and again to say it's fine, even, or this is the average of those readings for the last day, and it's pretty much the same as it was for the last 10 years of its life. But if you see an anomaly in there, you can do anomaly detection down at the edge. If you said with Stream Analytics at the edge and things, to be able to then take some insights and then take an action, which would be to stop the machine immediately. And then at that point, you can send whatever you like to the cloud, because that's now important data, different data. And you could have anything on that. You could be looking at the RPM or the vibration or the torque on a particular motor, or you could even be using vision at that point to look at the actual area that you're milling, perhaps, and something's gone wrong in it. So you could do a lot of this stuff just down at the edge. And again, that's why Microsoft have made the Percept, so as a way of sort of showing you how they believe this edge processing workload should be done. But you don't need a Percept to do that, as you've said. You can do it with a Raspberry Pi, and certainly most of my edge experiences with the Pi, because I tend to spend most of my IoT world in the proof of concept and development stages. Mostly when it goes to production, the company are happy at that point and they take over. So I get to spend all my time with the cool tech and let them deal with the harder part. But no, it's awesome. It's really interesting to me.
And I think just something to pull out a bit as well for folks is that they might be thinking, well, hold on, okay, I could probably do processing on the device anyway. I just write my own code and deploy my code to the device. Like, there's nothing new there. But I think the important distinction is something like IoT Edge. We've talked about functions, we've talked about Stream Analytics and Friends, is that this is the same underlying functions runtime, the same Stream Analytics runtime, the same things that you would run on Azure. If you were going ahead and sending them up to Azure, you're just deploying the same thing just to an IoT Edge device instead of an Azure function in the public cloud, for example. So I think that's the important distinction, is actually you start getting this unified kind of not control, but deployment plane almost. Even bringing Azure Arc into the mix. I know it's not IoT specifically, but thinking about then being able to take, to AWS, to GCP, to Azure, to your IoT devices, to your Kubernetes cluster on premises. I can run Azure functions on any of those platforms. That's kind of exciting and interesting at that point.
It is that, as well as the update journey as well, because you're right. You can absolutely, and I have got clients that don't use IoT Edge, and we need to orchestrate our own update journey.
Yes.
And one of them just uses GitHub actually, and pulls from GitHub and keeps that up to date, and it works. It's perfectly fine. But these things are brittle, and you've got to manage them yourself. Yeah. Whereas Microsoft have already thought about how this works, and it's not just Microsoft, the other cloud providers, but in my experience. And I know I'm slightly biased, but in my experience, Microsoft are ahead of the curve, certainly with newer services like IoT Hub Update and things like that, that allow you to keep your device's code up to date automatically, and it just handles that part for you. You can deploy your module to Azure IoT Hub, and then set it to deploy those modules out in whatever way you like, down to all your IoT Edge devices, or some of them, and in layered deployments and things like that. So there's so much thought that's gone into that side of the platform that makes it management on that side so much easier.
Oh, excellent. And I'm conscious that we've been going for about 3/4 of an hour here, I think 40 minutes. So thinking of getting us towards a kind of a wrap-up stage, I guess. We talked about, I know I could keep going and going and going, but yeah, we've got plenty of times to geek out. We've got upcoming Latte session as well, as you mentioned, the Latte band.
That's true.
But
looking forward to that.
I guess digital twins was something you mentioned as well, and this is a really, really fascinating space now. When you think about things like Microsoft Mesh, spatial anchors, digital twins, IoT devices all starting to come together and being able to build up a world effectively. It's not even a representation. You are really building a world. Is really, really exciting. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, it's amazing. And the more you learn about it, the more you realize that there are umpteen applications for this out there. Actually, I was speaking to somebody and they made a really good point. I'm a big Formula One fan. I've been watching Formula One for years and years and years. And the conversation drifted over to IoT, and this guy he'd worked for McLaren down there. And he was telling me that they made one of the first proper practical digital twin implementations, but this was a long time ago, and all of the teams use a version of this now. So if you imagine the amount of different moving parts on a Formula One car, and not even the moving parts, so all of the looms, the wiring between all the parts, so they've modeled everything down to individual wires and the gauges of wires, and they could simulate how the Formula One car would react if they reduced the gauge of a wire, and then how long the car would last. So, and the internals of the engine, and then even how things react when they're vibrated and pushed around in 3D space and stuff like that. It was amazing to listen to, and he couldn't tell me everything because he'd not been working for them for years, and it was still under NDA, but just the bits that he could tell me about, it was like, I'd not thought of it in that way. But that's components, but we can even model people in places. So you're right, you can make real world applications here. So all the way from like a whole building, all the way down through the people, down to even the light switches that you're switching on and off. You can model all of that and integrate your IoT devices into that model so that you can then interrogate it. You can query across this graph of data to be able to grab information and query for insights, and then make actual actions, business level actions based on that data, and it's impressive. You get a version of that in a way with IoT Central, and it's pretty powerful, but it's the sort of the query language I think is the ability to be able to query over that. And obviously Microsoft's digital twins, Azure digital twins, there, the query language that they've built on top of what is essentially, I think, Cosmos DB.
Okay.
Underneath the hood.
Nice.
Is awesome. So you could do almost plain language queries on there, select queries, MySQL type queries, SQL Server type queries over that data. It's mega impressive.
Awesome. I'm just taking a look at the query language now. And yeah, it is very, very simple, isn't it? Awesome.
Yep.
No.
Yep. And fast.
Yep. Awesome. I mean, that's the main thing, right? Is if you're building up that world, you don't want to really introduce latency and things into that, because then you break that experience, that immersion, I think. And interestingly, earlier today I filmed another session, which I think goes out before this one, to do with gaming. And we were talking about esports, streaming, and that kind of world. And something that I brought up as a topic that I thought I can see that space going in, and I can see elements of that here as well. Imagine the world where you're watching, you're watching some kind of esports, you're watching a game, but rather than watching it on the 2D screen like we watch right now on Twitch or anything like that, you were actually able to navigate around that world, be part of that world, be able to see players' HP and weapon reloads and ammo and whatnot, just kind of as little indicators over their head. Coming back to your Formula One scenario, imagine a world where you can put on your HoloLens or your glasses or whatever it is. Instead of looking at the TV, you've got almost this overlay of what's happening on the track, and you can kind of zoom in, pinch to zoom, look at the car, look at the various components of the car, all these things. That's the really exciting thing I see about digital twins, is just this really new way. We're entering Star Trek, right? That's what we're doing. We're entering the holodeck. We are getting there, and not just being able to interact with, simulation, there we go, end of, but bringing that real world into the holodeck and into the simulation.
Yeah, you mentioned Formula One. Funnily enough, Formula One and Codemasters, I think a good while ago, always wanted for you to be able to play their Formula One game while the race was on. Nice. And they would feed the telemetry from the real race into the game. Cool. And then you'd be a ghost car, obviously. But you could drive along and pretend to be another team and try and race those other cars.
That's cool.
I'd love that. I don't know why they've not done it yet, because you've mentioned it.
Possible,
surely they're there. They get all the GPS information already, and all the timing, and the black boxes that the FIA put inside the cars have got all the data that goes through that. So I'm hoping that one day, maybe the next iteration of Formula One games, you'll be able to do that and actually play along. And it's one of the few sports that would work on, because by its nature, you're on a track, so you can't go any further, and those things will generally go one way. Even a crash, you could put that in the back into the game.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think you could do it with football, because there's only one ball in the game. It won't work, would it? So, but with Formula One, it's autonomous almost, isn't it? So you could sit there and play along with that quite easily, I think.
Yeah, it's awesome. Not too different to Flight Sim, right? Because you look at Flight Sim and what it does with weather data and what it does with bringing in the live air traffic data. Same concept, same principle. So if you're listening, you know what you need to go and do.
I think Codemasters have just been bought by a bigger company as well, actually. So is it EA Sports have bought Codemasters? I think. Know. So you never know. They might have a big influx of money to make this happen now. I'm sure it was EA Sports.
Yeah, EA bought them December 2020. There you go.
There you go then. Yeah. So you never know. Wow. Yeah, not cheap. But Codemasters, are funnily enough, that's a UK company, I think, isn't it?
It is.
And I'm pretty sure Midlands-based UK company. I could be wrong on that.
I did think that as well, and I don't know why.
I a feeling.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Good.
Yeah, so there you go.
So I guess to wrap us up then, what's your kind of parting thoughts, closing thoughts, things that are most exciting you at the minute? I guess we've got a bit of an indication, but what should people kind of leave this with and maybe start thinking about, whether they've started their journey, whether they're kind of going along? What are Pete's top tips?
Well, go and play. Obviously, there's so much content out there. Go and watch shows like the IoT show with Olivier Bloch. That's fantastic. So if you're interested in the cloud side of things, obviously myself and Cliff Aegis, we run a Twitch show called IoT Live, and we just chat about stuff that's happening in IoT from week to week. That's Tuesdays at 9 p.m. BST. And people come along to that and they tell us off because every time they watch it, they want to buy new tech. So me and Cliff tend to show the stuff that we've found interesting, and we'll go and buy a new device and we'll talk about it on the show. And then we get emails from people going, "Oh, I bought all these things." And that's one of the beautiful things about speaking as well. Go to talks and listen to what the people that are speaking about IoT, people like Rob Miles as well. So go and do that, and then tweet people like me about it because we love hearing about the stories and your experiences with that, and we love to help as well. So yeah,
awesome.
Do that.
Pete, awesome session. I would love to carry on geeking on, but I feel we have to wrap us up at some point, I'm afraid. But thank you so much for joining. Really great session, really great show, and I'm sure we'll get you on to talk about something different. Maybe we can go in a specific area and talk about something, but thank you for joining. Really great session, Pete.
Well, thank you for having me. Cheers.
So there we go, folks. We have been talking all about IoT, IoT Hub, IoT Edge, devices themselves, digital twins, the holodeck, Star Trek, Formula One. You've had everything in this session. And I think it really goes to show, right, where IoT, we've always had the devices. We're now starting to make those devices smart by bringing technology to them and then bringing the power of the cloud and doing stuff with that as well. So a really exciting space. I know that I'm going to be probably getting this Raspberry Pi cluster back out again and doing some playing around very soon, but definitely encourage you to go and take a look at what's out there. So you know the deal. If you've liked the session, please go ahead, hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know as soon as there's new content. And of course, we're not just on YouTube. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and cloudwithchris.com, where you can listen to the recording and read the transcript at the same time, or read some blogs that are there as well while you're there. So with that, thank you folks for listening and watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next session, bye for now.